It began with a whisper, a rumor shared by one friend to another, something trivial that shouldn't have mattered. But when the song found its way into the hands of the curious, it was no longer something to ignore. It was a harbinger of nightmares. The song, a haunting melody, had no name. No one could recall who had written it or where it had come from. Those who had heard it described it in different ways. Some said it was a lullaby, others a dirge. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was unsettling. The tune echoed deep within the mind, reverberating through the halls of your thoughts, impossible to forget. And for those who dared listen to the entire thing, it was more than just disturbing. It was the beginning of something far worse. It had started in a small town, not far from a bustling city, where no one ever expected anything out of the ordinary to happen. The residents of Cedar Hollow were simple folk, most living in modest homes and working the land. They had heard rumors about the song, of course, but it wasn't until a stranger came through that the song would take its first victim. Jonas Burke was an unremarkable man in his mid-30s, with a disheveled appearance that gave him the air of someone who hadn't been sleeping well for a long time. He was a wanderer, someone who went from place to place, never staying too long in one spot. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and he carried an old beaten guitar slung over his shoulder. He arrived in Cedar Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon and, for reasons no one could understand, played the cursed song in the town square. At first, no one noticed. He was just another traveler, playing a tune to pass the time. But as the eerie melody slipped into the hearts of those nearby, something began to shift. They listened, entranced, as the dark strains of the song filled the air, luring them closer. The first person to go missing was Margaret Lawson, a widowed seamstress in her early 60s. She had been one of the first to hear the song, and according to the few people who had seen her after the performance, she had looked unsettled. The following morning, Margaret was gone, and her house was left unlocked, as if she had stepped out for a moment and never returned. The townspeople assumed she had simply wandered off. It wasn't uncommon for people to go missing in Cedar Hollow. Some got lost in the woods, others left without a word, and a few had a habit of running away to start fresh. But as days passed and more people disappeared, the townsfolk began to panic. A pattern emerged, one that was both chilling and unmistakable. Each person who vanished had heard the song. Jonas Burke was seen less and less, and the song seemed to linger in the air, following the residents like a shadow. Each time someone heard it, they felt it, a cold chill in their bones, a deep sense of foreboding that threatened to consume them. The disappearances escalated, and soon rumors began to spread that the song was cursed. The town's only priest, Father Samuel, had heard of such songs before, though not in such a long time. He gathered the remaining townspeople in the church and tried to calm their fears. But when he spoke of the curse, it was clear that even he didn't fully understand its origins. Some songs carry a weight far greater than any man can understand, Father Samuel said, his voice low. The wrong notes, the wrong words, and they become something else, a force that can control your very soul. I have heard of such songs in ancient texts, but they are nothing to be trifled with. But it was too late. The song had taken root in the town, and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, a strange thing began to happen. The missing people were found, but they weren't the same. Their bodies were discovered scattered across the woods, their eyes wide open, their mouths twisted into expressions of terror. The authorities were baffled, but the townsfolk knew the truth. The song had killed them, but it hadn't taken their souls. Their bodies were empty husks, shells of the people they once were. The murders were brutal and inexplicable, with no sign of a struggle. The victims had been found in various states of mutilation, their bodies arranged in grotesque patterns, as though someone was trying to convey a message that no one could decipher. It was a nightmare that never seemed to end. Jonas Burke, the man who had brought the song to Cedar Hollow, was nowhere to be found. The authorities searched for him, but there were no leads, no trace of him in the town. It was as if he had vanished, leaving only the song behind. And then the killings began. The first of the murders was young Ellie Parker, a local girl who had been close friends with Margaret Lawson. Ellie had been one of the last to see Margaret alive, and it was rumored that she had heard the song shortly before her disappearance. The night of the murder, Ellie's body was found in the woods, her throat slashed open, her eyes wide with fear. The scene was eerily similar to the others, but this time there was something different, a strange symbol carved into her forehead. The townspeople were terrified. Whispers filled the air. The song was now part of the murders. Whoever had written it, whoever had played it, was now using it to carry out their deadly work. No one knew who the killer was, but everyone had a theory. Some said it was Jonas Burke, the man who had first introduced the song to the town. Others believed it was something darker, something supernatural that had taken control of the town and its people. As the bodies piled up, the killings grew more brutal. Each murder seemed more calculated, more violent, as if the killer was trying to convey some twisted message. But the truth was far worse than anyone could have imagined. The cursed song was not just a tune, it was a doorway. A way for something ancient and malevolent to enter the world. The song had not been composed by a person. It was a creation of something else, a force that had existed long before humanity had come into being. The song had a purpose that could only be fulfilled by blood. The song wasn't just controlling the killer, it was creating the killer. As the town descended into madness, there was one man who refused to give up hope. Elias Harper, a reclusive historian who had lived on the outskirts of town. He had heard the rumors about the song, and although he had been skeptical at first, he couldn't ignore the patterns. Something in the town's history was connected to the song, something that had been hidden for centuries. Elias spent days combing through old records and books, looking for any clue that could explain the killings. It wasn't until he found an ancient text buried deep in the archives of the town's library that the truth was revealed. The song had been created by a cult, a group of dark practitioners who had sought to summon a terrible entity from beyond the veil of this world. The song was not a simple melody. It was a ritual, a binding spell that would open the door to a realm of unimaginable horrors. The cult had written the song to draw the entity into their world, but when the ritual failed, they sealed the song away, hiding it from the world. But somehow, the song had resurfaced. Elias realized too late that the killings were only the beginning. The murders were a necessary part of the ritual, a way to feed the entity that had been summoned. With each death, the door grew wider until there was nothing left to keep the entity at bay. Soon the entire town would be consumed, and the horrors from beyond would spill into the world. In the end, Elias tried to stop the song. He played his own version of the melody, one that was supposed to undo the curse. But as he strummed the first few notes, he knew it was already too late. The song had claimed the town, and there was no escaping its pull. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was Jonas Burke's face, staring back at him from the shadows. His eyes were empty, hollow, nothing more than a vessel for the entity that had taken over him. And in his hand he held the cursed song, ready to play it again. Elias was never seen again, and neither were the rest of the people of Cedar Hollow. The town disappeared, swallowed whole by the darkness, leaving behind only whispers of the cursed song, a melody that would never be forgotten. For those who would listen, it was a song that would call them to the edge of madness, beckoning them toward a fate far worse than death. And if you were unlucky enough to hear it just once, it would be the last thing you ever did.